Hi everyone, it's wonderful to see so many of you here tonight for Kylea Tink's Community Town Hall. My name is Kristen Locke and I'm the spokesperson for community group North Sydney's Independent. We're a community group which is supporting and resourcing Kylea Tink's independent campaign for Canberra. A quick reminder before we begin, we are recording the session, so if you don't want to be seen on your recording, please turn your camera off now. That's the bottom left second on your screen, bottom second from the left in the bottom left corner of your screen. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Wallumedegal and Cammeraygal country on which we are fortunate to live. Our usual Zoom housekeeping will have questions and answers for about an hour. Hope you've got a glass or a warm cup in hand. Feel free to use the chat. And as always, please keep your comments in the chat respectful, constructive and on topic. Thanks for all the questions you've submitted tonight. We did receive many. Please be assured Kylea wants to hear the views and perspectives of people from our community as much as possible. If your question isn't answered tonight, there will be another town hall on Wednesday, the 20th of October. So keep an eye on the Friday newsletter for registration details for that one. You can also email Kylea anytime. For Kylea's Town Hall tonight, we're pleased to welcome back Michael Pascoe, who some of you saw as he joined us in a previous Zoom Q&A. Michael is one of Australia's most experienced journalists and a North Sydney electorate resident. Welcome back, Michael, and thank you for hosting us this evening for Kylea's Town Hall.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Yes, I am a journalist and therefore inevitably fascinated by the current groundswell of support for independence for people who would genuinely represent their electorate in Canberra as opposed to just the interests of a couple of major parties. There is a tide running in the affair of Australian politics. Makes me very pleased to be hosting the questions in this town hall. And of course I have a job to do, and that job is to take the blame if anything goes wrong. That is the role of the host. If we don't get to your question, because there are so many, that's my fault, nobody else's. I'm used to taking the blame, so that's all right. But what you're here for is to hear from North Sydney Independent for Canberra, Kylea Tink. Welcome, Kylea.
Hi, Michael, and thank you so much. Thank you for doing this for us this evening, and it's so fantastic to see so many faces tonight here on the Zoom. So I was saying a little bit before we came on that, you know, I feel quite honoured to be asked questions by Michael Pascoe and by everybody that's dialed in this evening. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. So we've got a lot of questions. What we're trying to do is condense many questions into one to get to the main themes that people are asking. So off the top, one of the questions that I believe you've been most asked about in meeting people around the electorate so far since you launched your campaign 2 weeks ago, and that is, how will you ask your supporters to allocate their preferences when they vote?
Yeah, actually, it is definitely one that I've been asked a lot. That and the question around what would I do if there was a hung parliament. Just before I go on, can I check that the sound is fine? Denise and Johnny, oh, okay, thumbs up. I'm sorry if you're finding that your sound is a little bit crackly. Please bear with us. The session is being recorded. But back to your question, Michael. Yes, I've heard a number of times now, people have asked me what would I do with preferencing and what would I do in the case of a hung parliament. The first answer is actually a really easy one for me to give, because the reality is I trust the people of North Sydney to actually know their own mind when it comes to preferences at the next federal election. And from that perspective, therefore, I won't be providing instructions about how to put the numbers beyond number 2 down. Obviously, my aim, I beg your pardon? Oh, sorry. Obviously, my aim is to have as many people as possible put me as number 1. And from there on in, it'll be up to people to make up their own mind on how they preference. When it comes to the question of the hung parliament, I actually also think that is pretty straightforward for me, because as an independent, it's my job to make sure that I get in there and get the best outcome for the people of North Sydney on the issues that they're most concerned about. And it's very clear even at this stage that those issues are urgent action on climate, a forward-facing economy, strong federal integrity commission, and equality for all, particularly gender equality and safety at work for women. So, you know, in that case, I'd be sitting down with all parties to bring us to the best possible position for our electorate.
And the last time we had a hung parliament, a handful of independents did very well out of that, bending as well as listening to the major parties and making their choice. A lot came out of that. Were you at all inspired by the outcome of that hung parliament now that you're looking back at the role of the independents?
I think I'm inspired by independence in general. You know, not only did we see the amazing work done during that period where we did have the, you know, 3 or 4 independents who were instrumental in bringing about those policy positions, but even in the last 3 years, you know, we've seen the work of Helen Haynes in the drafting of the Integrity Bill. We've seen Zali Steggall's work around climate bills. We've seen the successful work of Andrew Wilkie about, you know, accountability in gambling. And so everywhere I look, actually, what I see is that it's independents that are actually driving the debate. And if there weren't independents at that federal level in the last 3 years, many of those conversations would still be on the backbench or the back burner. So I think the real opportunity here is to increase the number of, you know, strong, independent crossbench individuals who can actually advocate for the issues that are important to our community.
And just independence running seems to already have an effect on some people. Next question, technology, Willie. Judith has a question. Get Judith back. No, let's move on.
No luck with Judith? I can see Judith.
Judith, can you unmute?
Perhaps? Yes. We unmuted. Hi, Kylie and Michael. It's awesome to meet you the other day, and your dog Bailey, of course, at Tunks Park on Sunday. I'd like to ask, you said at your launch event that you voted Liberal at the last election. If you could, would you go back and change that vote? And if so, why? And along the similar lines, what would you say to others in our electorate who voted Liberal about why they should change their vote in the upcoming election?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Judith. And you know, I think I am on record, and I did vote for Trent Zimmerman at the last federal election. And when I think back on why I did that, I did it because I liked him. You know, I've met Trent a number of times, and I think he is a nice guy. And in the conversations that I'd had with him, or the things that I'd heard him say, I really believed that he was somebody who was very committed to driving change around the climate space, not only for environmental reasons, but for economic reasons. And so I guess that's why I gave my vote to him as our candidate last time around. I try not to spend a lot of time dwelling on what I would do differently if I could, because I feel like I would not get very far at all. But what I can say to you is that what's become clear to me is that even though Trent talked one way, his voting record is actually exactly the same as Barnaby Joyce. And that was a real wake-up call for me when I saw that. And I thought, this is not what I want for my community, for my electorate, for my family. And so I think it's really important as we move forward that, you know, we exercise our right as voters to actually ensure that the voice that's being advocated for down in Canberra is actually our community voice. And that's why, you know, I'm running as independent. Party politics has never really appealed to me. I actually think party politics is completely broken. And I think as a result of it, Canberra is broken. You know, we have a political system at the moment that seems to be in gridlock. I honestly believe that the only way to move that gridlock on is by putting in a strong, you know, crossbench of independents that can be there to advocate for the community voice. So if there's anyone sitting out there, you know, still deciding which way to vote, and to be really honest, I think that's whichever way you may be considering voting. It's not just if you may be considering voting for the incumbent. The reality is I really encourage you to look at what has been achieved in the last 3 to 6 years versus what was said was going to be achieved, and then really decide whether you are comfortable with a candidate who is constantly having to diminish the electoral belief because they're aligned with a party and party comes first, or whether you want a candidate that will actually go to Canberra and make sure that it's community that comes first. And that's, you know, that's a massive part of why I even decided to stand, to be honest, Judith, because I think I really had that realization that our community voice just wasn't being heard, and worse, it was being taken for granted as just being an easy vote in Canberra, and I think we can do better than that.
There's an issue there about how unrepresentative party membership has become of the major parties, that as the membership shrinks and does not reflect the population. But moving on to the next question, again, technology willing, muting and unmuting willing, comes from Andrea Wilson, who is one of the founders of another community group in our electorate, Voices of North Sydney. Andrea. There is always an interesting tension in any live event.
You know, it's interesting, Michael. I was just thinking the upside of a Zoom format is there's no doubt we have people here tonight that we may not get. Oh, there she is.
I'm here. So look, hi, I'm Andrea. I'm one of the founders of Voices of North Sydney, which we founded in 2020 with the aim of improving community participation in our democracy. In between lockdowns, we've held meetings where we've asked participants to tell us about the issues that matter most to them. Integrity in government has consistently rated in the top 2 issues at every single meeting. So we've just seen the New South Wales Premier resign because she is the subject of an Archaic investigation. And many people have said that it seems unfair while a number of federal ministers who have seriously and blatantly, apparently, breached ministerial standards, and they still have their jobs. Can you explain why a federal Archaic is important and what effect it will have on how we're governed?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And that's a great question. And it is particularly topical in this last week. I mean, there's no doubt there's been a very emotional response to the resignation of our Premier, Gladys Berejiklian. And I think it's interesting because I actually have a great deal of respect for Gladys, and I particularly respect the decision she's made to stand down. You know, she's been very aligned with the values that she's always espoused, and I commend her for that. I actually think the issue is that we haven't seen that same behaviour reflected at our federal level, and to your point, there's been ample reasons for people to have held themselves to a higher account, whether that's been sports rorts, whether it's been, you know, the robo stuff, whether it's been the cases of sexual assault or, you know, the allegations of sexual assault in Canberra. So I think if anything, what we're seeing in New South Wales is the very reason for why we need a federal ICAC, because it brings home for us that there needs to be that level of accountability across all government, and to not have it at that federal level is just to leave ourselves in a position where not only is it not drawn out, it's almost made farcical by the way that it's dealt with in terms of a quiet shuffling to a backbench.
So it's more than 1,000 days now since a federal integrity commission was promised, and there's no sign of one. And it even goes beyond that. People saw the Four Corners last night. One of the things that has been promised repeatedly for the past 5 years is a register of beneficial ownership, and it just hasn't happened. Now, live broadcasting, live Zooms, technology, a certain frisson, a certain tension as we go for another live question. Alan Baldry, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh.
I'm good, okay. Hi Kylie, hi Michael. So Kylie, my question is, why shouldn't I vote for Trent Zimmerman at the next election? Trent is a nice guy and a moderate Liberal who's been a champion for climate change action within the Liberal Party for a long time. As I'm greatly concerned about climate change, it appears to me that Trent is representing my concerns at federal level, and hopefully he and the likes of David Sharma will bring about change in the Liberal Party, which, if still in government, will be more effective at implementing climate change policies and plans than an independent.
Oh, what an interesting proposition that is, Alan. I'm not sure that I agree with all of the elements of it, but let me break it down for you. I think to the first question, I think that sounds like you are in a very similar place to where I was only 12 months ago, where I did hope and believe that our local federal member would be working from within the tent, which is a phrase that you hear very frequently to bring about policy change within the party politics. I think if we've learnt nothing in the last 6 years, it is that while you may have those moderates in the party, when it comes to the voting on the floor, the voting still goes in the direction of the majority. And as such, no matter how nice Trent is or what he said to us, his voting record is identical to Barnaby Joyce's. And that to me is pretty horrendous. And it's not just the same as Barnaby Joyce's. It's also almost identical to Peter Dutton's and, a lot of other people that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. So I think when it comes to Trent, it actually doesn't matter if it was Trent or any other person standing there in a party position. The reality is once they get to Canberra, their vote is subjugated by the party line. And, I think what we have seen of the government in the last 2 terms is that despite what they may want to say, they are very backward when it comes to making decisions that are forward focused for our economy when it comes to climate change. We have a federal government at the moment which is failing to provide a policy framework that sends very clear messages to investors on what they can expect to experience when they come into the Australian marketplace. They are not providing a coordination across the federal level. We have some great things happening at the state and territory level, but they're all happening independently. The federal government could play an incredible role in coordinating across the country in that way. And then as a final point, we have a federal government who still seems to be determined to offer subsidies and investments in old technology, including fossil fuel and coal power stations and gas power stations, when they're not actually putting the same investment into new energies. And I had a really interesting conversation with a group called Beyond Net Zero this past week, and they were telling me about a fantastic project which is currently underway in the Hunter Valley to actually turn an entire industrial zone up there over to a renewable industrial energy. Now, they've asked for what I think is quite a modest grant from the federal government to support them in getting that up and running, and they're not getting it. Yet we are still seeing millions of dollars go out as coal subsidies for an old technology. So I just think, for me, the decision to run actually was this clash of, I knew in my heart we needed to do something more for our planet to have a healthy future for our children. But when I suddenly saw the government continuing to invest in coal and gas power plants, it was my business head that actually turned on and went, this makes no business sense. So I think where I am, and as I'm running as an independent, is somebody who says, yes, we need urgent action on climate. We need it because it's the right thing to do to ensure our children and their children enjoy the same quality of life as we have. And that quality of life is not just about the planet we live on, it's about the economy that they live within, the job opportunities that they have. And I think at the moment our federal government is doing us a disservice. So, Alan, at the end of the day, you have the right to vote whichever way you wish to vote. And I really thank you for sharing your thoughts. And these are the conversations I want to have with people, because we are a diverse electorate. But I guess I would end by saying, if you're happy with how it's been going for the last 6 years, then that is your choice. I think we can do better. And I think sending an independent to Canberra with a strong community voice would send a very sharp message into that environment that we need change. What I will say, just finally, is that a strong crossbench. So I know, having spoken to Zali Stegall, Zali did amazing climate bills that were actually sent back out of the House without debate by our local member. He sat on the committee reviewing those bills to decide whether they would go into the House, and he was part of the bloc that rejected them. 2 or 3, I think it's 3 more independents on the crossbench, and that crossbench will have the power to actually say, no, this topic needs to be brought into the House. And I think that's incredibly powerful. Bring the debate back into the House where we can all see it and hear it, and stop it getting stomped up in the party rooms behind closed doors that we never get to hear.
I suppose it's the nature of moderates to be moderate. Malcolm Turnbull said that trying to deal with Craig Kelly, you were dealing with a political terrorist, someone who's prepared to blow the place up if they didn't get their way, whereas moderates remain moderate. And when they've got an opportunity, like Zali's bill, they remain moderate. And yeah. Another question, a bigger, tougher one, I think, in a lot of ways, and that is how you're going in dealing with policy development. I mean, one of the great challenges of being an independent is that you're independent. You haven't got a machine around you advising and telling you what to have as your policy. How are you going on developing policy?
Yeah, I don't have a machine around me, but what I have is an extraordinary community. And I think I confess I wasn't really familiar with the geographic boundaries of the North Sydney electorate until I started to get involved with this movement. And it's really broad, and there are a lot of really clever, passionate people that live here. I think from the minute I've gotten involved here, I hope that everybody appreciates, I don't ever profess to position myself as an expert in anything really, other than listening to people and seeking out expert advice. So it's early days for me. We're literally in week number 3. But what I am really enjoying is the community uplift and the swelling of community interest in this, and people putting up their hands and saying they'd love to be part of a discussion when it comes to, climate policy, when it comes to workplace policy, when it comes to international relations policy. And so at the moment, we're pulling those working groups together. And then the intention will be that those people, in consultation with myself, will sit down and bash out, what we think the North Sydney electorate would want us to take to Canberra. Once they're prepared, they'll be shared back with the community for input, until we're satisfied that we've got a strong position to take to Canberra. So I think that's pretty exciting, actually. Out of all of the bits that we're doing here, that is the bit that excites me the most. And to be honest, I would expect, if they were worth half their salt, that the parties should be approaching us asking for copies of those policies, because at the end of the day, whatever delegate gets sent to Canberra, that's what they're meant to be there doing, is representing us and our concerns and wishes.
I think there is a world of difference between what you've just described and the focus groups that the PR people put together for the main party. So more power to that. The next question, it really brings together several that have been asked about your position on offshore processing and the Australian government's treatment of asylum seekers. I think, for me, it can be summed up in 2 words: Kylea family.
Yeah, look, I think that my public record actually speaks really strongly to this, and it's certainly something I'm incredibly proud of and would never shy away from. I believe that as a nation, we have built ourselves on a basis of compassion and integrity and stoicism. And I think that where we have come to as a nation in the way that we treat asylum seekers in the last decade is simply un-Australian. I don't think it does us any service. And I think that we have ended up in a situation where the people in control are trying to manage us through fear rather than optimism and opportunity. You only have to read the 2nd verse in our national anthem, and it is very clear in our national anthem that we encourage people to come to this nation to be part of who we are. When it comes to the Kylea family, I'm actually, it's nonsensical. It makes no logical sense. It's certainly, there's no degree of compassion in it whatsoever. How can you have 3 members of a family be given an extension on a visa for 12 months and leave 1 child without that same opportunity? About 6 years ago, I pulled together with a whole group of people, and we funded a campaign for ourselves for the community called We're Better Than This Australia. And the whole focus was to draw Australians' attention to the way that children were being treated in immigration detention centres. At the time, there were about 750 children under the ages of 16 who were being detained in offshore detention centres. And the treatment of those children was abysmal. You know, if they showed up with glasses, the glasses would be taken from them. If they showed up with medication, the medication would be taken off them. They would be checked, their identity would be checked twice a night. And it was horrific. It was really horrifying to stop and think that, you know, you can sit and go, well, that's our government doing it. Well, no, that's us doing it, because we're the people who put those people into government. So we ran We're Better Than This to draw Australians' attention to it, and with the key purpose being to get those kids out of immigration detention centres by Christmas. Now, the campaign was successful in that we managed to get them out of the immigration detention centres, but to my shame, it was also the introduction by the Australian government of temporary protection visas. So they brought in short-term 3-month protection visas. And I think what is horrendous is those visas continue today. We literally have about 10,000 people who have lived in our country now for over 8 years, and yet they are unable to get employment. They're unable to put down a lease because they're only guaranteed intermittent terms of residency. And I don't think that's fair, despite what may have been said in the past. I think we can do better than that. And I think it is our responsibility to do so. When you look at all the data, you know, that action has not negated the number of people still trying to get into Australia. So I think that we should be looking at that very seriously and holding ourselves to a higher standard.
The big difference now is that we actually have record number of asylum seekers coming, but until COVID, they came by plane. And unlike the previous waves, 95% actually aren't refugees, as opposed to those who were coming before. So just to be totally clear, if you're elected the member for North Sydney, anything you can do in Canberra to get the family home to Biloela will happen?
100%. That family should be in Biloela. Those kids are Australian. They were born here. They've gone to school here. They deserve to stay here. And yeah, I think it's unconscionable where the government has put them at the moment.
Thank you. All right, let's live dangerously. Let's try the technology again. Let's try muting and unmuting. Peter, are you there?
Yes, Michael, I'm here. Hi, Michael. Hi, Kylie.
Hi, Peter.
Look, like many in our electorate, I'm really pleased to see your support for a reconciled Australia and equal opportunities for Indigenous children. A watershed towards reconciliation was the articulation of the Uluru Statement some years ago now. And we've seen not just indifference, but really active obfuscation and opposition from a former Prime Minister and the current Deputy Prime Minister. I find it shameful. I find it gutting. But no independent, to my knowledge, has ever actively pursued this generous offer from First Nations Australians. Given your support for reconciliation in North Sydney and the wider Australian community, would you ever consider elevating this as a policy priority to take up the cause if elected?
Yeah, I think the simple answer to that, Peter, is yes. If what I hear from across the electorate is that this is an issue that the electorate would like to see advocated for more loudly, I will do it proudly. And it's made all the more easier in that it does align with my own personal opinions in this matter. You know, I was born in a small country town called Coonabarabran out in northwest New South Wales. And about 80% of the community at the time I was born had an Indigenous connection, you know. So I think I've seen the reality of living in those communities, and I think it is abhorrent in terms of the way that we just don't seem to be able to reconcile ourselves to our true history. As far as I'm concerned, I think we would be far better as a nation if we recognise that we are 60,000 years old, not 200 years old. And I think that there is a real magic and a real opportunity in us embracing that for ourselves and for our children and for our country. And I think it is an important part, as you said, Peter, of healing and recognising who we are. And if there's one other thing I'd just leave with, I think one of the things that politicians are really bad at doing is saying, I got that wrong. I'm sorry, I got that wrong, but I can see now that we can do better. And I think that for me, that's what I want to see more of when it comes to that level of Canberra. It's okay. You know, our politicians are human. And I think that it would be unfair of us all to say you have to get it right the first time. But I think what is unacceptable is to continue, as you said, to ignore it and to deliberately be belligerent in not addressing it. I would be incredibly proud to be able to be part of a movement that brought our nation to the completeness of what it could be. So yeah, that would excite me, Peter.
Kylea, you're from the bush. One of the areas of greater divisiveness that has crept into Australia in recent years has been country versus city, has been that latte sipping elite in North Sydney and other such electorates versus the regional seats that really got the Morrison government over the line last time, and where the right-wing rump seems to be holding policy to ransom. As someone who bridges the regions and the big smoke, is it possible for us somehow to reduce that divisiveness? Is it somehow possible, more possible, to bring this country back together again?
Michael, I have no doubt it is. You know, and I have to say that I think there are a number of politicians that make more out of this than what is the reality of the circumstance on the ground. You know, Coonabarabran is on the edge of the New England area, and some of the projects that are going on out there in the renewable energy space are quite extraordinary in terms of the wind farms they're setting up, the solar farms they're setting up. So I think it is unfair to say that rural Australians don't have concerns when it comes to climate. I think, you know, where they seem to keep on getting fogged over is in the whole debate around what happens to a rural economy if all of a sudden mining jobs start to disappear. And that's where I think that initiatives like the Beyond Net Zero one that we're seeing up in the Hunter Valley are so important. You know, as you said, I grew up in the bush, so I've actually seen the bush transition a number of times already in my lifetime, you know, off the back of wool, then it was off the back of the train system, you know. So I know rural economies are incredibly stoic, but they need to be supported and given clear direction on what, you know, where they're headed. So again, to me, that circles back to the federal government's the opportunity for the federal government to actually be really clear on policy for not only the people living here, but people wanting to invest in our markets, and to send those clear signals that are, this is the transition plan. This is how we're going to get from A through to D, but it requires us to go through B and C. And I think, you know, more often than not, when you hear that panic kind of yelling, it's because people are assuming we're going to go from A to D with no middle steps. And that's simply not the case. Nobody is calling for that level of disruption. Everybody wants to see a managed transition, but we know we can do it faster than what's currently being proposed. So I think that's the opportunity for the federal government.
That's specifically or largely about some of that transitioning, that reimagining of Australia around climate as an issue. The broader questions of the allocation of resources of a country that is becoming less equal, more unequal. Is there a danger in the elite electorates disregarding the bush, the regions, the outer suburban areas that perhaps need a bit more help than the better off electorates?
It's an interesting question, Michael, because when you look at it, I mean, the beauty of a democracy is that all seats are created equal. Yeah, that was why our constitution was created in the way it was. And I think that what we do need to have is a sensitivity to the way people live in other areas. And again, I can speak of this firsthand. You know, when growing up in Coonabarabran, we had an amazing hospital because we were halfway between Melbourne and Brisbane, and we were frequently an A&E site. So there was a fantastic hospital there with a fully equipped accident and emergency centre. I was driving home about 4 years ago, I guess it was now, with my children in the car, and I came across a car accident. And doing what my parents had taught me, I pulled over, I pulled the car off to the side at a safe distance. I made sure my children were fine. I then went to the accident site, found the people who had been involved in the accident, safely removed them from that site, got the handy first aid kit out of the back of the car and started to administer very basic first aid as I knew it. But of course, got on the phone and rang for police and ambulance. We were only, I think we were 12 kilometres out of Coonabarabran at the time I made that call. It took 25 minutes for a single police officer to come to the site. And when the single police officer showed up, she apologised that the ambulance couldn't be there because the ambulance was actually in Dubbo, because it had driven one patient from the Coonabarabran jail to Dubbo because they were too inebriated. So all of a sudden I'm on the side of the road, quite a significant car accident. There's no emergency services. There's only one police officer and my 3 children in the car with the dog, you know, and I think it was quite horrifying for me to actually see the degree to which that rural service had been stripped. So I think that there is a need for us to readdress how communities outside the metropolitan area are being serviced. And there are definitely resources going in again at that state level. You know, state and territories are looking at how they connect, but I think there is a real job for the federal government to again look at how do we coordinate these activities to make sure that Australian communities aren't left behind. Because to be completely honest, it was an extraordinary place to grow up. You know, my parents are still out there and it is a beautiful place to live. But it's 5.5 hours from Sydney, and I worry for my parents now because I think they're getting to that age where I'd like to see them closer to healthcare services. So that likely means they'll need to leave Coonabarabran in the next sort of, 5 to 10 years. So again, I think we can do better. And, I often wonder if part of the problem with our current situation at federal government is that we seem to be in a situation where our federal government takes our focus and hones it on only one or two things. They want us to be focused on COVID and the economic impact of COVID. They don't want us to look elsewhere. And actually, I think the reality of our society is that we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So with an issue such as this, we should be able to address it at the same time as we unpack other issues. Otherwise, why have we got so many ministers at the federal government level? We just need one and everybody else can go home.
Oh, that would save a lot of money. I think you might have to now. It'd probably be a difficult policy to develop, but I'm somewhat attracted to it. Just to balance that, you've painted this wonderful picture of the bush. Hang on. Tell us why you love North Sydney.
I came to Sydney in 1994, and when I came, I was here for 5 years. That was the plan. I was coming to Sydney for 5 years, and then I would go somewhere else. But I love living in Sydney, and I love living in North Sydney specifically because it's just such a vibrant community. And everything that I could hope to be able to offer my kids as an experience and to enjoy myself as an experience is within easy reach. Sydney is an infinitely livable city. I am very lucky, though, that I do still, in non-COVID times, I get to head west over those mountains, and I do find I have to do that, to be honest, Michael. If I can't get west once every sort of 6 months or 8 months, I do go a little bit stir crazy because I do like the space to breathe and think when you get to the other side of the mountains. But North Sydney is an incredible place to live, and I think it can only get better by us becoming more active. I think we have our own challenges, definitely housing affordability, transport. They're things we need to address and embrace with a forward-looking focus. But again, I feel optimistic that our community can do that.
There's a line I like from a fellow Queenslander expatriate, Lloyd Rees, who said that he felt sorry for people who were born in Sydney because they never see it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes outsiders to come here and appreciate just how precious this jewel is. And to be in North Sydney, to be on the lower North Shore of Sydney, I think Paul Keating was right on that occasion when he kind of said, if you're not living in Sydney, you're camping out. And if you're not living in North Sydney, it's second best. It's still pretty good, but it's a bit second best. Look, for the last time, let's try the technology. And for our last adventure into the world of muting and unmuting, I'm feeling pretty confident because the question's coming by a member of North Sydney's Young Indies, a group of young and soon-to-be voters in our electorate. And of course, they just know technology. They're born that way. Over to you, Alex. Please prove me correct.
Can you hear me? Oh, cool.
Yes.
So with climate anxiety a building issue among young people, how do you aim to reduce the role of coal in Australia's energy grid?
Yeah, Alex, that's a great question. And the thing I love about that question is that there are people that are much smarter than me that are already working to answer it. So with the climate being one of the key issues that I've heard consistently across our electorate, I've been fortunate even before I was announced to be having conversations with all sorts of people, from independent economists through to people who've been involved in establishing wind and solar farms, people working in the area of innovation in this space. And I think what I would say to you, Alex, is why I don't have a simple answer for that. But what I do know is that there are people out there who have quite extraordinary plans to move us to a renewable and sustainable future much faster than what we're currently looking at the moment. Less than 5% of the gas that we take out of the ground at the moment is used here in Australia. Most of it is exported. So we can say that we know we don't need any more gas projects to meet our own domestic needs. We also know that the majority of the coal and power plants in this country are due to retire by natural recourse as it comes into 2030 and 2035. So rather than us looking to extend their lives, why wouldn't we be working harder to make sure that when their time's up, we're actually ready to go into the next generation of renewable and sustainable energy? So I think it's a really exciting time for us as a generation. We're very close to having the battery technology that'll enable us all to generate a lot of our own electricity needs, meet a lot of our own electricity needs. And I think what's really interesting is it's the states and territories are moving us into that direction. It's really only the federal government that is pulling back against that at the moment. And I think if we take a stand to say, no, we want you to align, and we want that policy certainty. It is the federal government's job to provide policy certainty for our nation, so that not only people here at the moment, but investors coming into the country know which way we're headed. It's the federal government's job to provide coordination across the states and territories, so that where there are amazing things happening, like the work being done in the ACT and the New South Wales, those learnings can be leveraged into other states and territories. And then it's our federal government's job to provide funding when there's no other source of funding to be had, to step in and close a gap so that we can move forward faster. So there's definitely ample opportunity there. And I guess what I would say to you, Alex, is that I'm particularly interested in hearing from you guys. And because the reality is, this is your world, from people from 16 to 24, 25, this is your world and your moment. And I think if I was given the opportunity to go to Canberra, I would consider that a real honour to be sent by you there to make sure that the things that matter to you are heard down there. And, I know I'm fortunate to live with an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and I know they're not short of opinions. So I don't expect that anyone listening out there would be short of an opinion. I think it's really important that we find a way that, your voice is heard really loudly and clearly, because this is definitely a generational change, and this is a reckoning for my generation. We need to step up and own this right now. But as we do that, we do it knowing that it's only as custodians for you guys and the guys that come after you. So, I think the opportunity is there for us to be superpowers, a superpower. Australia should be a superpower when it comes to renewable and sustainable energy. And at the moment, we're lagging. So it's stepping into the opportunity rather than being afraid of the fear that's being created at the moment.
This may seem like an incredible question, but can you believe that there is some doubt that the Australian Prime Minister will go to Glasgow at this stage?
Can I believe it? Yes, Michael, because I don't think anything would surprise me. I think, okay, this is me speaking as an individual now. My own personal opinion is actually, I remain really disappointed with our current federal government. I have tried it in myself to find places to feel hope when I listen to them speak. But I think the reality is that we have a federal government that is so fixated on staying in power that the conversations that you hear coming out of that place are more often about who's in what ministerial position than they really are about what the minister is pursuing as a legislative reform. So I completely can believe that the Prime Minister may not go to Glasgow. I think if he doesn't go to Glasgow, it sends a very clear message to us in terms of his true intent when it comes to tackling the opportunity that is, climate. And I think it would be a disservice to our nation if he didn't go. I just don't think that's acceptable. And with respect, I understand that he's a human. He is still only human. He has a family and he has children, but he went for the job. This is his job. He wanted to be Prime Minister and he's in it. And I think he should be leading us more effectively when it comes to this. So yeah, I certainly don't think it would be acceptable if he stayed home. And if he stayed home, all I can say is I would expect to see an election called sooner rather than later, because I can't see any other reason that he wouldn't get on that plane and go.
Let me squeeze in one last question from me. There have been some other questions come in, which I think we've touched on, and no doubt we'll be touching on again as the campaign goes on, about what you learn from Zali. Also a question about the Pandora Papers, which I think we touched on with the beneficial ownership register. That was a key part of the Australia's own dirty little secret about the Pandora Papers. But you just mentioned the Prime Minister's family. A personal question for you. How's your family handling the demands on you that you're taking on?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, actually, because I think, this is very much a community movement, and North Sydney's Independent existed well before they came and found me as the candidate to run. And I think what it does is puts you in a very unique position, though, that I am so committed to this and so want to do this justice. And I will do it. I will give it 150%. The reality is there's another part of my life, though, that still needs 100% of me, which is I have a job. So I am still working in a real job. I work for an organisation which works with youth at risk. So, kids that would otherwise fall through the cracks. They might be coming from a home environment where there's domestic violence or drugs and alcohol. They themselves may have been in touch with the juvenile justice system. So, I'm still very committed to meeting my obligations and responsibilities to those guys, because much like I just said to Alex, those guys are our future. So I want to be part of contributing to that as a positive future. My kids are, without a doubt, when all is said and done, regardless of everything else I've done in my life or may go on to do, my children are the most important thing I will ever do in this world. And they are three extraordinary human beings who, I think, not because they're, super bright or super sporty, I live in awe of their capacity to keep turning up every day, and I know every day is not easy. When we all remember, if you're still there and you're 16, all I can say is it gets better, but being 16 is a hard time, and for my son, he went through last year an first HSC in COVID times. It's really taxing. And so I think we are I'm still just a human as well. I'm first and foremost a mum. My second role is then probably as a daughter and a sister. I'm very close to my mum and dad and my brothers and my sister. And I'm a friend too. I'm really blessed to have some incredible friends in my life. So fitting this in with all of that just means that I'm having a pretty extraordinary experience at the moment in terms of having a cup that is well and truly overflowing with opportunity. And I'm grateful for all of that. They're hanging on for grim life, Michael, is what they might say. If you ask one of them directly, they'd probably say we're hanging on for grim life. And please tell mum to put food in the fridge is the other thing they would say. She needs to go to the supermarket and put food in the fridge.
Look, if you want something done, give it to a busy person, as the saying goes. I haven't met your family, but I think it'll be a pretty safe bet. They're rather proud of you right now too. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael.
And thanks to the people who have sent in questions, who sent in earlier questions that we could try to coordinate into a representative sample of questions for you. And yeah, okay, it's my fault that we didn't get all the questions asked. Okay. But still, read the New Daily. It's a good paper. Don't blame me. Don't blame the New Daily. Don't blame Kylie. It's all me. Which means it's time for me to throw back to Kristen, who I think has a question or two of her own. Kristen, hello, come in.
We're going to be
Hang
so
on.
good at these Zoom meetings.
I found it. I found the unmute button. That's good. A few in the chat, Kylie. Two things. One, we've had questions on over the last couple of weeks. The Big Deal is a movie that's been going around. You've seen that, Kylie?
I have, yeah. I actually watched it last Friday, thanks to North Sydney Conversations.
What was there anything in there you didn't know, or what struck you? Because a lot of people are starting to see that movie, and with ICAC coming up, what struck you about that movie as probably motivated you to keep going, from what I hear?
Yeah, it is a fantastic piece of television journalism, and I would encourage everybody, if you're at all interested, to watch it. I think it'll be airing soon on the ABC, Kristen. Yeah, I'm not sure. Denise knows the exact date. I'll get somebody to put that up in the chat. But I think there are a number of things that I really took out of that. The first of it, so the movie is called The Big Deal. I just saw someone asking questions, what's it called? It's called The Big Deal, and it's being produced by a gentleman called Craig Rucastle. And it looks at how our Australian political environment at the federal level is influenced by money. So what role does money play in politics in Australia? And to answer your question, Kristen, I think I was quite shocked by how prevalent it seems money has become in terms of getting face time with people that matter. So, in one section of the movie, they talk about a seat next to a minister at a dinner costing $100,000. And they do this really amazing kind of juxtaposition of here's a company in Brisbane that works in the coal and gas space. This is the amount of money they've given over a period of time, and this is the number of meetings they've had with ministers or ministerial advisors, and then they take you and introduce you to the farmer who's living on the edge of that land, who is fighting desperately to stop the coal seam gas exploration, and he has been unable to get a single meeting with anybody to put his case forward. And that just really shocked me, because I thought that again, it's just not Australian. That's not the way we should be doing politics in this country. So I really took out the key messages I took out where it is a need for greater transparency, who's meeting whom when, and what's being discussed. I think there is a real case to make in terms of capping political donations so that everybody is on an equal playing field. I think there is a real case to make, a very, very strong case to make in terms of spending around political advertising. And I think we saw that in the last federal election. To have one Australian resident spent $84 million on advertising in the last election because he had a message that he wanted to put through. Didn't win a single seat, but he spent $84 million on advertising. I think that's obscene. There are small countries you could run on $84 million, and that's where it should have gone. So I think there's a case for that. And I think generally it just speaks to that point when nobody's watching, when there's nobody there to kind of keep the lights on and to make sure that the house is being kept clean. People will do what they want to do if they think nobody is there to see it. So yeah, it's an excellent movie, and I think it poses really valuable questions to us again as voters to what we will accept, because I think my grandmother used to have a saying that was something to the extent that what you walk past is what becomes the acceptable standard, what you don't stop and address. And I think that documentary is a great example of, well, are we going to continue to walk past it, or are we going to demand this level of accountability from our federal government?
Yeah, I actually haven't seen it yet. I've heard about it, and I'm almost worried to see it. I'm thinking maybe I'd rather not know, but we have to know.
Can I just, on that, what I would say though is that North Sydney Conversations did an excellent thing. At the beginning of their screening on Friday night, they asked us all to rate how we thought our constitution was going, our federal government was going, from 1 to 5. You know, and I remember I put it in as a 3. And then at the end of the documentary, they asked you again, what would you rate it? 1 being we're in so much trouble, we may as well, you know, go and stick our head in the sand, and 5 being we have no issues whatsoever. And I still rated it as a 3 because I think that the real lesson in that movie is that no system is infallible when you put human beings around it. And so it's actually the people that drive the consequence of any circumstance. So I was left at the end of that movie thinking, yeah, that is concerning, but isn't it great to be able to have that insight that that's the opportunity for us to address? You know, we can see it, therefore we can fix it. If you can't see it, you can't do anything about it. But it actually left me feeling like, yep, there's an action list I can take to Canberra. We'll get that done, and everything will be so much easier.
Yep, another job for this. We'll do it.
Yeah.
So really, that's it for this evening, Kylie. If you wanted to say anything else before we wrap up, this is our first Q&A, so we'll have more. And Kylie, you're very keen to hear from people, aren't you? And we are just volunteers, so we are getting through as many as we can.
Yeah, absolutely, Kristen. There's one question just popped up, and if you don't mind, I will answer it, because the person's asked, you've spent a lot of time talking about, you know, why you wouldn't just vote for the government as it currently exists, the LNP. Why should I consider you if I'm not an LNP voter? And I think my answer to that question is still the same. You know, there is an opportunity here to do politics differently in North Sydney. You know, we can actually, this lovely group of latte sipping inner city dwellers can actually choose to say, no, our voice matters, and we are informed, and we do have opinions. And what I can tell you as somebody I am fundamentally a centrist. Okay, I come from a small business background. I've worked in businesses all my life. So I like good business sense. I'm also incredibly socially progressive. And that's because I believe in this country that we call home, and I believe it can be better. So the reason I want you to vote for me is because I want your voice to be heard in Canberra, not any other political party's voice. It's still your opinion, but what I can tell you is that if you send me to Canberra, I will go to Canberra with your voice ringing in my ears and holding it in my heart, and making sure that it comes out of my mouth when I get that opportunity down there. So, and then to your point, Kristen, and that kind of builds to this, you know, the reason this works for me, guys, I can honestly say, I would never have run as an independent of my own volition. I wouldn't have sat in my sunroom reading a book one day, or read Julia Banks's book and thought, gee, I need to get up and run for government. It's not how I'm wired. But the fact that there is this extraordinary community movement called North Sydney's Independent, and, you know, North Sydney Conversations and Voices of North Sydney, the fact that there is this community swell makes me feel like I'm part of bigger something than that is just me, you know. And even to the point, someone stopped me on the weekend. I was wearing my Team Tink t-shirt, and she was very excited. And this lady said to me, oh, you know, look, I've just signed up. I'm expecting my t-shirt this weekend. You know, like, how does it feel? What's it like to be part of Team Tink? And I looked at her and I smiled and I said, well, actually, I'm the Tink. Like, I'm the Tink in that Team Tink.
Oh, she didn't realise. Oh, right.
And she was like, oh my God, it's the Tink. It's the Tink. And I suddenly felt like a Dr. Seuss character. You know, there was people rushing at me to talk to the Tink. But I'm the mouthpiece of what is a much bigger organisation. And I just think the opportunity for us to get out there and invite other people into this ship, you know, we are a vibrant and diverse community. And I thank you guys for being early adopters. I thank you for being here tonight. And if I could ask you to do anything, it's just to go out and spread the opportunity that is this movement, you know, and just let people know that their opinion does matter, their expertise matters. And guess what? There's somebody who actually wants to listen to that and wants to make sure that that's the message that's taken to Canberra.
Yep, we'll be lucky if we can get you up, Kylie. We really will feel like our voices are going to Canberra, just as our democracy was designed to do. That's it for this evening. So thank you, very special thank you to Michael and Kylie, of course. A special thanks to all the questioners for this evening. Keep them coming. Thanks again for all the questions. Now, remember, Kylie does want to hear from you. So you can contact Kylie on the email address info@kylietink.com.au. Very simple. info@kylietink, one word, .com.au. Keep an eye out for our Friday newsletter for the dates for our next Q&A. Well, it's going to be a Wednesday, 20th of October. And together, let's change the climate in Canberra. Thanks, everyone.
Well done, guys. See you soon.
Authorised by Kylea Tink, North Sydney, New South Wales.